I prepared a few images and a couple of quotes that I thought would be useful to shift gears a little bit, and just stop me anytime you want to stop me. Ask, like, throw in your 2 cents like always. But I'm gonna just push forward through a few things, and I got a choice here on how to approach this. I think I think what I'll do, because we're talking about Balkanization, breaking up countries through weakening them by dividing them, amplifying little ethnic groups to, whether it's the Kurds, whether it's the Druze, and promising them like little territorial jurisdictions if they just go with a certain geopolitical maneuver. That's been the name of the game, right? So divide to conquer, break up nations according to ethnic minority groups. There was a name for this actually back in the 19th century, in the form of a collaborator of Albert Pike, the Grand Master of the Scottish Rite, who sort of retooled much of the Scottish Rite. He was also a co-founder of the KKK and a leading Confederate general, who had a friend, a very close handler actually, across the ocean, named Giuseppe Mazzini. And we've talked about Mazzini a lot. A lot can be said about this guy. He's probably the founder of the modern mafia, as it is understood, as it has taken that form from 1850 onward. This guy was a dictator of Italy for a year under the triumvirate, and he spent most of his adult life in his most politically potent social engineering years in London. That was sort of his home away from home. After he got kicked out of Italy, he lived out his days working with Lord Palmerston in London, where he arranged and managed an international network of what came to be known as his Young Europe movements, sort of movements that took different profiles of different ethnic groups, whether in Albania, Germany, France, England, you name it. The Ottoman Empire, you had young Ottomans, young Albanians, young Turks, young Germans, and young French, even young Americans, which was the movement that Albert Pike was a member. And basically the idea was to create a greater Albania movement around this idea that Albania should grow in its territory, and every young person who would be recruited should suffer and internalize the wrongs of previous generations of abuses that were committed by the Russians or by the Polish, and so everybody had little sacred stories that are not that different from what was done to many Israelis who had to be conditioned, as you've noticed, right, to relive the abuses that their great-great-grandparents suffered in the concentration camps. And it's really psychologically terrorizing for a young person to go and relive that type of trauma. And it's almost like a hypnotic induction that creates like a neurotic disorder. We've seen this applied in its own way in American schools to especially a lot of African-American kids who have been told to sort of like relive the abuses of the slave whip on your ancestor, relive it, and cultivate that sense of anger and desire for revenge generations and generations later. So you can see how that type of mindset would be very useful for imperialists who desire to have divide to conquer forever wars amongst neighboring peoples. So that's what Mazzini did. Albert Pike played a big role in advancing it in an American-friendly way. And the target right now, even though, interestingly enough, the Habsburg Empire, which was for a long period a rival of the British Empire, the Habsburg Empire disappeared from the map as a political empire. The leading figures and leading families did not disappear. And one figure, who I'm going to show a little video of right now, recently gave a speech in the parliament, the Austrian parliament. He's a member of parliament there. He's Karl von Habsburg. And Karl von Habsburg is the heir of the Habsburg family, the Habsburg dynasty. And if something like this were reconstituted once again, as some believe it might be under the European Union rubric, then the Habsburgs would reclaim a lot of the power that they'd once enjoyed, and they still do enjoy, but not in the old way. It's a different way. Now I'm gonna show this. I'm gonna say something about this. So let's hope the sound plays. And this is only a 1.5 minute clip from a recent speech he gave about the need to carve up Russia. Oh, let's see, does the sound play?
The small conference of the post-war Russia Forum took place in Vienna, in which the Pan-European movement also participated. A participant from Ukraine said, "Big Russia brings big problems, small Russia causes small problems." To be precise, he was talking about the Moscow colonial empire. Today's Russia is actually a very classic colonial empire ruled by Moscow. This begins with the economic exploitation of the colonies and continues with the oppression of the people of this colonial empire, even to the attempt to use their men as cannon fodder in the colonial war against Ukraine. A Europe that is interested in the security of its citizens should begin developing scenarios for a crumbling Moscow colonial empire as soon as possible. Speak softly and carry a big stick, you will go far. Europe, the European Union, simply has to relearn the principles of power politics. Incidentally, China is also considering scenarios for how to secure certain areas in today's Russian Federation if its empire falls apart. People often say that we must support the other Russia. Yes, we must. At the same time, we must be fair enough to acknowledge that we can no longer find the other Russia in Russia itself. The war to conquer Ukraine is not just Putin's war.
Okay. So let me just remove that from the screen. Actually, let's look at that for a second. So this is, again, Karl von Habsburg.
I noticed that he doesn't have a Habsburg jaw. I was looking for the jawline. Don't see it.
Austrian Habsburgs. That's the Spanish Habsburg family.
So it's a different. We're talking about a different bloodline here, or different.
No,
branch.
same bloodline, just different.
Same bloodline, different branch.
At a certain point, yeah, different branch of the family. One had the Austro-Hungarian, and the other the Spanish Habsburg.
I know we've discussed this before. I just want to show everyone what I'm talking about, so everyone can see how attractive these guys were. But these are all the paintings of the Habsburgs, who were notorious for being like extremely inbred.
Yes.
And yeah, I mean, and this is what happens when you marry your sister.
He might have he might have gotten
again.
Yeah. The gene pool is very, very shallow with these ones. Yes. He might have gotten some surgery, maybe. He might have, that could have.
Yeah. Okay.
Maybe.
Yeah. I need somebody to look into that for me, though. Does that guy have a jawline? I need an examination of his jawline.
So the thing I want people to keep in mind is number one, his map. Obviously, this is something we've seen in a lot of Rand Corporation think tanks, a lot of Atlantic Council, a lot of Western think tanks who have been pushing this decolonization Russia program, have basically mapped out. There's like 85 or so ethnic groups, minority groups in Russia, and they basically take where those groups are, and they basically say they should each be a country and a sub-country within that, and so Habsburg here is using that line and showcasing what different kind of maps there are, and it's basically something that's already in motion as a plan to just inflame these various separatist movements. Some of them get support, actually, I discovered recently, from Azerbaijan, which actually supports two Muslim separatist groups in the south of Russia, probably with Israeli and CIA as support as well. The other thing to keep in mind is, and I just want people to hold this in mind, is behind him, there's a number of symbols, but the two most interesting ones for the purpose of what I'm going to say are, number one, this particular crest here, which you remember what that one is, right?
Oh yeah, that's the cross of Jerusalem. Wait, that's not the cross of Jerusalem. That's the German Iron Cross, isn't it?
Close, yeah. That actually is what the German Iron Cross looks like, but that itself is based upon the cross of Malta. The
cross of Malta, yes, yeah. Okay.
But it's the same cross. You're right. You're totally correct.
So cross of Malta, which is the Rothschilds love to fly that flag, right, on their yachts.
Yes, and not only. So that cross is something which was created by the Knights Hospitaller in 1098 when they were created to usher in and oversee the First Crusade. But the second symbol here, and that's from the sign of the flag of Amalfi, the city-state of Amalfi, that was a rival and sometimes partner of Genoa and Venice. And the other one to keep in mind here is this symbol, which is a circle with another cross inside and a number of stars in the circumference of that circle. Okay, so let's remove that.
That reminds me of like those balls that the Royals always hold, that have they always have like a little cross on top of it.
Yeah, that's a reference to Charlemagne, who was given the first, when he was made Holy Roman Emperor in 800. It was a surprise. He really didn't even want it. He fought against it for like 15 years because at the time, the bishop at Rome that later became sort of known as the Pope, I think he's still calling himself the Pope. But it was just another bishop. It wasn't like anything, but it was a much more reduced influence thing. You know, that Rome had just collapsed, and they wanted a political strongman to be their enforcer. And since Charlemagne had recently consolidated power over the Merovingians, his enemies, who his grandfather ousted from power, they were like, he's the man. He's the guy we need to try to manipulate and use to reclaim control and hegemony of the recently collapsed Western Roman Empire. And ultimately, they had also ambition to reclaim control of Constantinople too, which was the Eastern Empire that had split off in 390 or so. So that's where I think that symbol came from in it. But the interesting thing that's going to play a role in this, so keep in mind that the Balkanized Russia is one aspect. We're talking about breaking up the dangerous unification of various civilizational states under a common principle of cooperation. China, Iran especially, Russia, the Arab states, Africa, potentially Europe, but Europe's pretty far gone right now. But that's like one point of destabilization, and to do that with the Mazzini plan of inflaming young ethno-nationalist romantic idiots into becoming useful idiots that would ultimately be cannon fodder. And as the Kurds have discovered, and still for some reason continue to be, despite all of the evidence that they're cannon fodder and nobody cares about them. That's what they want to do for many ethnic groups in Russia, but also for China. So I want people to have this in mind too. And I'm gonna tie these things together. But this is from just one of many think tank reports that I encountered that have been dealing with mapping out the various ethnic minority groups in China, which some have believed could be inflamed as well for separatist movements to then slowly break apart China into an amalgamation of tinier little, much more controllable ethno states. You know, Tibetans are there, the Uyghurs are there. You got some permission for like Han Mandarins throughout, but there's a lot of subnations. Southern Mongolia is another nation they want to carve out. So you got things like that as far as divide to conquer operations as one aspect of asymmetrical warfare. So there's not just one type of kinetic warfare. It's full spectrum. It's space-based, bacteriological, the news, you know, the perception warfare, and then there's this as well. Now the other thing,
interesting. I didn't get to this tab when I was going through the presentation earlier, but this this account, Terror Alarm, it has like one of those gold checks, 177,000 followers. It says world's first agentic AI news and views. This thing is 100%. I mean, this had to be made by Mossad because it's so hyper pro-Israel. It's hyper anti-Russia, anti-China. But look at this map that it posted yesterday. Well, I guess maybe it posted the map originally on December 26th, but then it reposted it and said, let's go. And the original post says, most realistic map of Syria 2025. This is posted 7 months ago. And you can see Syria is balkanized into 5 states plus a like carve out south of Damascus for Israel. Funny enough, there's a Druze state and then there's an area for Israel, and that's exactly what's happened. So, wow. I mean, it like you were just saying.
Yeah.
They break these countries up and they balkanize them, and they do it under the guise of like trying to better serve the people of those countries. But really, it's just a way of making it easier to leverage each of these little political entities now and take them over.
Yeah, exactly. They got maps like that for pretty much every country,
including the United States.
Oh yeah. The idea of getting a new civil war based upon different factions and sub-factions within the United States did not disappear in 1867. They've been obsessed with doing it again, but doing it in a way that would have a very different outcome this time around. So that's certainly something that's also come home to roost. And we've gotten little tastes of that in the Summer of Love. We got the taste of that with the riots across America after George Floyd was turned into some sort of an angelic saint, and the Soros operations went into full propaganda effect, and we saw the type of taste, the small aspect of that could be, but there's much bigger waves being planned to hit the United States if people do not behave way more wisely about these things. So all that to say, here's another thing that I want people to hold in mind, because right now, look, there's something weird going on in Europe. So on the one hand, you have a transatlantic economy, which is about to collapse. It's sitting on a bubble upon a bubble upon a bubble upon a bubble. And we've talked about this. It's going to collapse. It's a time bomb. Yeah. So there's a fight over what the new architecture is going to be, and who will it serve, and how will it operate, under what principles is it going to operate, how will value be defined in that new system. There's a big fight. It's underdefined, and there's battle lines, different agendas. One thing about the case right now, this will make more sense, but I'm just going to show it. The founding father of Europe is largely this figure who's here pictured on the right, speaking to this dorky, lanky guy with the mustache on the left. And that, you know who that is, right?
He looks very familiar, but who is it?
Yeah, you'll get him. Coudenhove Kalergi. So it's Richard, Count Richard.
Oh my gosh, the Kalergi plan.
Yeah. So Richard Coudenhove Kalergi is so much more than simply he's most popularly known nowadays for the one aspect of his broader agenda of the Kalergi plan to basically, disrupt and annihilate the type of different ethnic groups of Europe through weaponized mass immigration and what have you. That's one thing he's known for. He himself was half Chinese. His mom was Chinese. His dad was a Coudenhove and a Kalergi in one. That's two bloodlines that attained prominence as leading mercenaries during the First Crusade. So both of and he writes very extensively about the pride of his two bloodlines that brought him into that position. And he would have had the Austro-Hungarian Habsburg Empire not been dismantled after World War I, he would have been a very high-level managerial elite within that empire. As it so happened, it did. The plug was pulled, and he found himself doing other things. One of those things was the obsession of creating a movement known as Pan-Europe. And this is a flag that he designed called the Pan-European flag. And what you see up there is his preferred design, which involved basically a yellow circle and a red cross inside of the red circle on a blue background. There was a variation of it that he changed, that added a number of stars around that circle. And he wanted this to be the flag that would unite all of the different states of Europe in one federation, modeled as sort of like a perverse doppelganger of the American United States of America. But I say perverse doppelganger because in his mind, he actually disdained democracy. He disdained the idea of the participation of the people. He disdained the idea of the consent of the government. He disdained the idea of inalienable rights, but yet he talked about the need to create a United States of Europe, right? So what are you really talking about here? He designed the flag. He designed a national anthem. He said that we should use Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, the choral piece. He called for that in the 1920s. This was created in 1923. And ultimately, that was ultimately selected. And Beethoven, I'm quite sure, would have been very unhappy with the misuse of his Ode to Joy choral piece as the banner, as the anthem of such a monstrous idea. And there's a picture of a bunch of the current Pan-European members, even today, with their little COVID masks and European Ukraine signs. So their idea of what nationalism means is a bit different. And so that's him. The dorky bald guy over there is an important figure because that's Otto von Habsburg, the father of Karl von Habsburg, who we just listened to. Now, Otto von Habsburg becomes somebody who is tutored, is mentored by Coudenhove Kalergi. Later on, he goes and he runs the Pan-European movement until the day he dies in, I think, 2011 or so. Who else did Coudenhove Kalergi work with here? I've got an image. So that's a younger Coudenhove Kalergi on the left. That's an older Otto von Habsburg on the right. That's the manifesto for a pan-European movement that he published first in the 1920s. And here's some of the leading members and collaborators that he worked with to build up his Pan Europa from 1920s until World War II. And on the left here is Karl Haushofer, a leading controller of Adolf Hitler and a leading member of the Hitler Thule Society, the Thule Gesellschaft, which was an esoteric inner high priesthood within the SS High Command. Mussolini was not an official member. However, many members of Mussolini's cabinet were members, and Mussolini was an admirer of Coudenhove Kalergi and vice versa. That was Kalergi's preferred form of fascism to embody the control mechanism that would shape the post-nation state Europe. He didn't like the Hitler variety. He preferred very much the Mussolini variety because the Hitler variety was too tainted in his mind with nationalism. And he's like, no, we should have a fascism that's transnationalistic. It's more corporatist in that sense, which is Mussolini corporatism.
Yeah.
Much more.
Yeah. Because of what's his name, the political philosopher.
Gramsci. Not Gramsci, is it?
No, it's Mussolini's political philosopher is.
Oh, Volpi de Misurata.
I don't think so.
Okay.
Keep going. It'll come to me in a minute.
All right. And then in the middle guy there is a devout member of the Pan Europa. That's Hjalmar Schacht, who is also known as the German Reichsbank, Hitler's banker, the head of the German Reichsbank.
Giovanni Gentile.
I never read him. I never read him.
Yeah. He became his minister of education, but he was like the guy who first came up. He's the guy who coined the line that's often misattributed to Mussolini, that the merger of state and corporate power, fascism is the merger of state and corporate power. Like, which is like, you go online and you look up that term and it's always Mussolini's face and Mussolini's credited with like saying it. But he's the one who actually, I think it was like in 1923, wrote that, like published that. He was the thinker and the philosopher behind a lot of, like, as I understand it, a lot of the stuff that Mussolini like said publicly.
Interesting. Okay, cool.
Anyway, sorry about that.
Oh, it's all good, man. Yeah. So, and then we have here other members. So we have the Hjalmar Schacht, the Reichsbank minister, who oversaw the German hyperinflation and its solution. So the creation of hyperinflation in Weimar Germany that destroyed the value of the Reichsmark and then replaced it with the Rentenmark, right? So the bankers who were overseeing the hyperinflation were working through the Bank of England and Montague Norman to manage Hjalmar Schacht, who then said, okay, the solution is bring your wheelbarrows full of money now that it's not worth anything, and we'll give you could trade it in for a shiny new Rentenmark. But that Rentenmark is going to come with new rules, new austerity, new rules that are going to force a contraction of your living standards, but at least you'll put bread on the table. So that was the reset, the hard reset of Germany that then gave rise to a period of humiliation for the German people. And ultimately, with that humiliation and degradation, a thirst, a radicalization that gave really perfect soil for somebody like a Hitler to promise dignity once again to the German people who had been embarrassed and humiliated. Now we're going to give you dignity again, and we'll bring back the best of Germany, and we'll get revenge on our oppressors. So you can see how psychologically it would play right into the Mazzini type of manipulative agenda that thrives off of victimhood. The other guy here is Walter Lippmann. Walter Lippmann is a guy who became a leading figure, a Fabian within America, and who ran things like the Council on Foreign Relations for a long period. Walter Lippmann is a social engineer, somebody who is, I think, a handler of Edward Bernays, the nephew of Freud, and a leading figure in control, the manipulation of consent. So how to create the illusion of democracy, but the actualization of a tyranny within a society that still has democratic values. You read his Public Opinion. That's his book and manual on how to do it. And he worked very closely throughout Kalergi's entire life on bringing Kalergi to America many times, from the 20s to the 30s to the 40s to the 50s. Kalergi was always in America, and he was always being sponsored by the Council on Foreign Relations. And for those who might have not heard our discussions about this in the past, the Council on Foreign Relations is the American branch of the British Roundtable movement that was known as the Royal Institute for International Affairs, also set up
a group of really, really nice people.
Yeah. You really don't want to let any of your children, especially young boys, be left in a room with any of the members of the Round Table movement. Ask Bill Clinton, a Rhodes Scholar, because that's also what the Rhodes Scholars were being organized around, was the Cecil Rhodes Milner Roundtable movement and Rhodes Trust operation. So that's one operation. This guy here on the right is Max Warburg, who is a financier, bankrolled a big chunk of the Bolshevik Revolution with Milner. So Lord Alfred Milner and Warburg were two bankrollers of the Bolshevik Revolution. Max Warburg was a bankroller of the Federal Reserve and that whole plot at Jekyll Island that many people have heard about. He was also the primary sponsor, according to Coudenhove Kalergi, of his Pan-European movement. And so that's the guy who I didn't add to this list, but I should have. And Cynthia Chung, my wife, has blown my mind with her research. There's several chapters in her Empire on which the Black Sun never set, going through in depth this network in ways that will blow your mind. And I'm actually going to show a page from her book very soon. One of the characters that doesn't come up in this image is Alexander Helfand, sometimes known as Parvus. Alexander Helfand was a Ukrainian Menshevik Bolshevik who participated in the first 1905 Bolshevik uprising that was it didn't work out. It came back with a vengeance in 1916 or 17. But in 1905, Parvus was working closely with Trotsky and with Jabotinsky. All three of these guys were together to overthrow the Tsar, financed by the Warburgs. And all three of them ended up doing very strange and very influential things in their later years. Parvus went on to bankroll the young Ottomans that came to power in 1908 as a precursor to the ultimate destruction of the Ottoman Empire. He also bankrolled the young Europa, and he was part of the Mazzini operation. I mean, Jabotinsky went on, his friend and collaborator went on and became a founding father of the most radical faction of Christian Zionist freaks, just Zionist freaks working in Israel. And we know Trotsky also went on and became
the father of the Republican Party,
the father of the neocons. That's right. All of his disciples became the founding fathers of the neocon movement that took over control of the Republicans during the Cold War. And Trotsky was actually caught through the Moscow trials, of which there's been an attempt to try to erase this from history. But I've through my research over the last 5 years, I'm now completely persuaded that these things were actually based on sound evidence, that Trotsky was part of a Nazi conspiracy in Russia to basically Balkanize Russia, to kill Stalin, bring Trotsky in as the golden boy and he was working with a giant fifth column network with penetrations in Harbin, where the Russian Fascist Party was based, in Japan, where, they had collaboration with him and the Japanese fascists, and in Nazi Germany and the British under Oswald Mosley's networks, who was the British Nazi working with Trotsky. And all of this was based upon the idea that if Trotsky were to come to power, he would basically give over territory to the Ukrainian Nazis. He would give them full sovereignty. He would give over big chunks of Russia to all these ethnic minority groups. Japan had their claim to a big chunk of Russia's east, for example. Germany wanted Russia mostly as the breadbasket, right? To loot the underhuman Slavs and use them as mostly slaves. And Trotsky was in collaboration with all of these creatures before he got kicked out of Russia and settled in Mexico.
Hey, do me a favor when you write this up.
Yeah.
When you write this up, I don't like write up Trotsky like this whole theory.
Mm-hmm.
The title of it should be The Ron DeSantis of the Soviet Union, and you should credit Chris Paul with like the template. But it sounds like Trotsky was supposed to be the Ron DeSantis of the Bolshevik Soviet Union.
That's a cool idea. That would make a tight title for an article. Chris Paul actually had this idea of Trotsky.
Chris, you should talk to Chris about this. Chris has, not on Trotsky. I'm just saying Chris has developed, because Chris was very early, very, very early on identifying that Ron DeSantis was going to be the deep state's choice to subvert Donald Trump and replace him. This was like in 2022.
Okay.
Yeah, I think he figured it out right around the midterms and just started like going hard on it and took a lot of shit for it. But he's developed this template now that you can like universally apply to all places. Like I would apply the template to Benny Gantz. I think Benny Gantz is the Ron DeSantis of Israel because he's kind of being presented. Even Trump has pumped his tires and been like, and done interviews where he was like, I don't understand why Netanyahu is still prime minister. Like this was 2021. I thought Benny Gantz was supposed to take over. And again, like I said before, Benny Gantz publicly says all the right things. He seems very moderate. He seems very reasonable. He wants peace with Palestine. He said he would sign the 2-state solution, like all that stuff. However, unfortunately, he wants war with Iran, number one. And number two, he says him and all the other leaders from these other factions said that under no circumstances can Saudi Arabia, for example, have a nuclear reactor, like a civilian nuclear energy program. And that's their position for every country in the region. So the point is that it's like it's a snake. It's like a snake. That's the template. The template is like someone who's presented as this really great alternative. Like Ron DeSantis was presented as, this is the MAGA that you can take home to your grandmother. This is the MAGA that you can take home and have dinner with your grandmother. It's not this loud, obnoxious New Yorker like Donald Trump. This is the nice guy that you can take home and show off to your mommy. But DeSantis, of course, deep state as it gets, in my opinion. But
yeah, absolutely, that's cool. All right, I'll reach out to Chris Paul and we'll chat about that. That's okay.
Yeah. So, he loves the Trotsky rabbit hole too. So I feel like y'all will.
That is a gift that keeps on giving. The more I scratch on that anomaly, the more discoveries that I keep on finding, and it's just incredible, the networks. And as you pointed out, the father of the neocons. But that's you could take it to the bank. That's where it happened. And there's so much more, right? So there's, just to say, really important angle that is way too often overlooked. Now going back to this guy, our boy Richard von Coudenhove Kalergi, there's two useful quotes that Cynthia pulled out that I want to read, because again, he's the father of the European Union. The entire architecture for the Lisbon Treaty, the idea of creating a centralized authority that would supersede the nation states of Europe in the form of the European Union, the European Commission, the idea of a strong military power. He wanted it to be a strong military. It turned out to be this effeminate, flaky, woke, absurd fest, but he wanted to be this like very strong command and control machinery. And I'm going to say something about how he thought about it working with a revived British Empire, which was the purpose of the Round Table movement. So the Round Table movement's entire purpose is to try to undo the American Revolution, reabsorbed America back into a new retrofitted global British Empire, which would essentially be the seat of a new Roman Empire in the modern age. That was at least their ambition, following the outline laid forth by Cecil Rhodes in his wills and manifestos. So that's what Bill Clinton's purpose was. That's Chrystia Freeland's purpose. Like that's what they do. That's how they're wired, right? So this guy says something about his vision in 1954. Describing in his book, An Idea Conquers the World. And he says here, I was aware from the start that the main obstacle to the unification of Europe would be the British question. For whilst on the one hand, the British Isles are an essential part of Europe, they are also the nerve center of a worldwide empire, extending over 5 continents. This special position makes it very difficult for Britain to tie herself exclusively to Europe. A union of Great Britain with Pan-Europe might cause Canada to secede from the empire and join Pan-America, with all the incalculable consequences such a move would entail for the political and economic unity of the empire. Only one solution seemed possible, and this was a complicated and difficult one. A united continent working in close cooperation with Great Britain and her empire. Clearly, Pan-Europe and the empire could not afford to pursue separate policies towards the rest of the world. Europe's purpose could be achieved by associating Britain with the European system without making her a part of it. So you can see exactly that this guy kind of admires the power and global expanse and influence of Great Britain as an empire, And he literally calls for this weird synergy where he makes the point that Britain should not be, everyone should be a part of it except Britain, which is exactly what happened. This is exactly when Britain, through the City of London, orchestrated the trap that was the European Union through the Maastricht Treaty in 1992. They made sure that everybody signed on and gave up their sovereignty to become part of this thing and create the euro. But they, instead of joining it, because Britain said, oh yeah, we'll join it soon, but right now we got this economic crisis that's being caused by George Soros speculating against the British pound. It's convenient, right? Convenient problem to have. They're like, we're just going to reorganize our affairs a little bit, and then we'll join you later. You just go on ahead. Now, was Britain ever planning on joining the European Union? Hells no. You don't go into the trap you set for your victims. But that's the way it worked. And so there's this weird relationship that Britain has had with the European Union, keeping their pound, keeping a measure of their control outside of the influence of the thing that's designed to tank. The other thing that he says here, same page, had wishful thinking influenced my program, I should certainly have suggested as a European Union under British leadership, the King of England acting as hereditary president of the United States of Europe. But alas, the problem was much more complicated than it seemed. In fact, the British question was the most difficult and delicate problem of all the complicated problems confronting Pan-Europe. England was looking toward a new organization of its imperial unity that it could not and would not imperil by any European entanglements. After all, Canada was American, South Africa, African, Australia, Australian, and India, Asiatic. And together they formed, with Britain, the greatest empire of all history. The guy is such a fanboy. It's uncomfortable to hear him talk in such a slavish way. He just wants to be, invited to the party. So he really would like to have, in his mind, some form of a crisis that would retool, give an excuse to create a presidency, ideally a hereditary presidency, and ideally one that had a British head of state managing the the union of European states. Now, the thing about this guy is that he was aware of something that today many people have forgotten, which is that we've been told that the British Empire disappeared. Now we have a Commonwealth. So on the right is British Empire in the days that Coudenhove Kalergi was writing. And you see all the red on the right. That's the British Empire. The sun never sets. It's 24% of the world's surface area. All the core strategic choke points of world maritime shipping were controlled by the British Empire, which made sure that if you control the choke points, you control the world. That's the way it works. And then you keep everybody fighting forever amongst themselves. So it's a weird centralized authority that relies upon forever stupid people fighting each other inside, right? It's a strange way to run a business. On the left is today's Commonwealth, and in black is basically all of today's British Commonwealth. And that's not that different from the British Empire. And they just renamed themselves Commonwealth in 1945 or 46 under the City of London, the hereditary systems of the city of the empire. And it still is about 22% of the world's surface area, many of the richest mining resources and other things, especially the Cayman Islands is a part of that area, which is a global nerve center of financial control, drug money laundering, terrorist financing. It's the same bloody empire. So the other thing, too, is that King Philip is not just a figurehead as many Canadians and even Americans believe or Australians believe. He's an active player within the thing. He's got prerogative powers to make war. Royal assent has to be given through his managers to any law that becomes law from the House of Commons, whether in Australia or Britain or Canada. So the institution of the crown is very powerful. That's on the left, an image, a tweet by then Prince Charles announcing the Great Reset in 2020. He was the one selected to be the one to announce the Great Reset to the world. And he's largely somebody who has been very, very... He's called for a global crusade to save Gaia from humanity. So that's his version of the crusade idea, to unify the world around a crusading battle. He also has, I think, the belief that he's part of the bloodline of Jesus. And I think that's something that a lot of the monarchs of Europe have been told. I don't believe it's true, but they've been told as a sacred myth to sort of legitimize their bloodlines, that Jesus didn't die on the cross, that he went to the south of France with Mary Magdalene, his sacred prostitute, and they had babies, and those babies became the Merovingians. And the Merovingians, according to, certain myth makers, became the bloodline that passed itself on to the leading families of the Normans, the Vikings. The Normans, by the way, which conquered England right before the Crusades, were the Northmen. The Northmen were the pagan Vikings, the sorcerer kings. And they were used kind of like ISIS is used today by the CIA as a proxy to destroy nations you don't like. That's kind of like how the Vikings were used and deployed. I went through a show with Burning Bright where we talked about this for a long time. And yeah, that's so they were given a sort of story to legitimize themselves. Many of the ruling families of England, the Cavendish family, the Coudenhove Kalergi families were all Viking families.
The Cavendish is, Cavendish that's a big one.
Yeah.
They're connected to the East India Company.
Oh yeah, and they have you and I talked about. You showed me these images of one of the top castles of the Cavendishes that has the mural inside of it of the revenge of the pagan gods, and the little Epstein Island temple in the back of one of the Cavendish estates, which looks exactly like Epstein Island little Egyptian temple, but it's same model, but it's like 400 years old and it's behind a British castle.
Yep. And then earlier you mentioned the Warburgs. The Warburgs, the Warburgs are aren't they much richer than the Rothschilds?
Yeah, but they're one of these Hofjuden families, right? So they're still relative to the type of higher families, because the higher nobility, they mock the Merovingians. They don't have any respect for these like nouveau riche. Especially the Rothschilds, that's super nouveau riche. They came in the 1740s,
1700s, yeah.
Yeah, but even like the Cavendishes and a lot of the Norman conquest, like the Norman conquerors, even they don't respect them either. They don't respect the Merovingians. That's, I think, why actually in the Hollywood movie in The Matrix, the Merovingian is kind of this pathetic character that the Grand Controller doesn't respect this guy at all. They see them as a bit of a useful joke. They believe that they're born of that they have the divine blood of the Sethian avatar that manifested in Jesus, flowing through their veins and shit. Like the Sethian avatar being the Sethian gospels of the Gnostic scriptures that portray Jesus not as a benevolent, loving son of God, but rather as a Lucifer avatar, as he's portrayed in the Book of Thomas, the Gnostic Book of Thomas. These two seem to be getting a bit uppity doing a show like this. Well, it's 12:52 a.m.
Well, Burning Bright's just known for doing 4-hour shows, and especially when I do a show with him, it's like a 5-hour show. So yeah.
Oh, right on. Oh, this really might be a marathon. Okay, yeah. Well, when you said that we have no shows coming after us, I'm like, all right, let's just play ball.
We could literally make it a 7-hour show. I mean,
yeah, I got no.
Let's see how high we can get John Harold's blood pressure by seeing how long we make the show.
I gotta get my pee bucket. Where's my pee bucket? No, so so you got right now this ideology of I made fun of the Gnostic Gospels, the Gnostic Scriptures, the Sethian avatar idea of the serpent deity, the Lucifer deity that manifests as the avatar of Jesus that the Gnostics believe in. That's part of the secret scriptures that they unveiled back into the world in Nag Hammadi, like the Nag Hammadi scriptures. They were always contained, and I think I've seen evidence now that they were not unveiled. They were not discovered. They were unveiled. It was like a coming out party after World War II. Same thing for the Dead Sea Scrolls, but they were planted there. They were already known by the inner elites of this occult underground. This is part of the thing. So what am I saying this? So let's go back here to the third and last quote that I want to share from Coudenhove Kalergi about how he chose and what he was thinking about when he designed what became the European Union concept. Now he makes the point, because keep in mind it's the yellow circle, right? The yellow sun with the red cross surrounded by the stars on the blue background. Now Coudenhove Kalergi says in his 1943 autobiography, and this is again Cynthia Chung, this is from her Substack, cynthiachung.substack.com, on a modern day crusade for the Holy Land Part 1. It's a fantastic essay. It's part of her book. And he writes saying, I chose the sign of the Red Cross superimposed on a golden sun as the emblem of our movement. The Red Cross, which had been the flag of the medieval Crusaders and the Templars. seemed the oldest known symbol of supranational European brotherhood. In more recent times, it has also gained recognition as a symbol of international relief work. That's the Red Cross. The sun was chosen to represent the achievements of European culture in helping to illuminate the world. Thus, Hellenism and Christianity, the cross of Christ and the son of Apollo, figured side by side as the twin enduring pillars of European civilization. That's useful because now you have two factors here. You got Apollo, the son of Apollo, and the Templar Red Cross as two aspects of this imagery. For those who may not be aware, Apollo is a solar deity of ancient Greece that is a fallen solar deity that was used as a sort of a template for the later iteration of Lucifer, a morning star. So the Apollo solar deity also is the incarnation of an earlier deity in the form, which was known as Marduk in Babylon. So Marduk was another Helios solar deity. At the heart, it was sort of the top god of all the gods of Babylon. And the temple, the Tower of Babylon, as far as surviving cuneiform tablets have pointed out, was devoted to Marduk. Marduk, again, solar deity, he had Enki as his sort of nemesis, the darkness, the dark shadow to his light as the solar deity. Apollo, same thing. Apollo had Dionysius, the god you celebrate under the moon of ecstatic states and orgy, as Apollo is the solar deity of the daytime. And that's sort of the way a lot of these mystery cults were always organized and still are organized. That's why when you look at things like Baphomet that the Templars were worshiping, is featured at least in the etchings of Eliphas Levi of the 19th century, who was overseeing a Templar revival in a certain Rosicrucian form, is pointing, this goat-headed androgynous deity, right, is with a snake body and goat's feet, is pointing upward to the sun in one hand and pointing downward to the moon on the other, pointing out the unification of opposites. And of course, on one arm he has the Latin word for divisia, break up, and the other arm has the tattoo on the forearm of coagula of reunify, right? So it's an alchemical breaking up to reunify concept, which you see pervasive across all of these things. So the fact that we'd have the Crusader idea, the Crusaders themselves, especially the Templars, were themselves a weaponized Christian outfit that was set up and was discovered to be Baphomet worshippers, and they were taught their headquarters were under Solomon's Temple. They were obsessed, according even to Albert Pike's own writings in his Morals and Dogma, with the reconstruction of Solomon's Temple to usher in sort of a new age of humankind under the revival of the gods. We have Cavendish, who has celebrated the revival of the ancient pagan gods. We got Coudenhove Kalergi doing the same thing. And we have also the Knights of Malta. Keep in mind that was the Karl Habsburg, right, had amongst the various symbols behind him, one of which was the Order of Malta symbol, which was the other Crusader order set up again by Benedictine cult controllers, what's his name? Gerard of Sasso, from Amalfi, who set up the Order of Malta, then known as the Knights Hospitaller, with that symbol, also to oversee the strategy of forever wars and to establish especially this Kingdom of Jerusalem, which Edward VII was obsessed with. Edward VII, who sort of ushered in this new age of British conquest in the Middle East and manipulation, was obsessed with rebuilding Solomon's Temple and restoring the Kingdom of Jerusalem. Leo Amory, the disciple of Lord Alfred Milner, who created and co-drafted the Balfour Accords. Lord Alfred Milner was a co-author of the Balfour Accords, was obsessed with the idea of restoring the Kingdom of Jerusalem. I would say even King Charles, in his ceremony that inaugurated him as king, had some weird artifacts from the Temple of the Holy Sepulchre that was given to him by Pope Francis, the Jesuit Pope, as a gift. So why would you pick a fragment from a cross contained in the Temple of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, which was the temple that was set up again by the Amalfi traders that were given permission to build this thing in like 1050 by a caliph whose name I'm forgetting. And that became the basis of the Knights of the Holy Sepulchre, another chivalric order that still exists and that still works with the UN and that still manages a lot of the schooling and educational programs in Palestine and around many Middle Eastern countries. So what is up with that? Why give him a cross that supposedly is the cross that Jesus died on? I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what they say is contained within the Holy Sepulchre. Why make that the gift to King Charles? And knowing that King Charles believes that he is the head of the church. He's the head of the Anglican Church. It's not the Pope. It's him. It's the hereditary institution. This is who Mark Carney has brought in to come to Canada to usher in the new government. The first time in 50 years, we had a monarch come to do the throne speech, which happens every opening up of Parliament. And this year it was King Charles, who basically gave orders to Canada to join the Rearm Europe program in the prepared oncoming battle with Russia, which Carney then did. And he then also told Canada in that speech to also integrate with the European Union, which we did. It was given royal assent on June 23rd. Actually, I have a little image of it right here. Canada signs a deal deepening European defense and security partnership. They had the European Comprehensive Security Partnership, and there's a picture of him with the European Union sort of Kalergi design behind him without the you can imagine it sort of there implicitly is the Apollo sun, the Templar cross, but it's invisible, but it's still kind of there for those with a mind to know. You have also Australia and the UK, which both agreed at the same time to do the same thing and sign strategic partnerships with the European Union. The other thing I just noticed here as I was talking is that Coudenhove Kalergi, in his 1954 autobiography, In the Idea Conquers the World, even said, I thought of Mazzini's Young Italy, of Theodore Herzl's Zionist movement. I also thought of my childhood days when my father's friend, Suwarworthy, then totally unknown, started the Pan-Islamic movement from scratch. I now set out to establish contact with all organizations of Pan-European character. I think that's useful too, because this character, Pan Suwarworthy, was an early influence of a younger Kalergi and a guy who was a co-founder of what became the more radical Islamist Pan Europa, Pan-Islamic movement, which is what the Muslim Brotherhood also emerged out of. That's what that was. So this guy's citing Mazzini and the Mazzini Young Europe. He's citing Mussolini as the basis. He's citing the Zionist theory of Herzl to all inform the ethic of this new Crusader society of empire that was his Pan Europa. Oh, what do you got there?
This makes me think of the article I shared yesterday when we had Joaquim on about Russia abolishing all the diaspora organizations. Like, just because when you talk about these pan ethnic movements, that's kind of what Russia's arguing. Like the underlying theory for why these diaspora movements should be abolished is because these diaspora movements that exist inside of Russia are all inherently anti-Russia because they are loyal to whatever foreign country they come from. So it's the specific one here being targeted is the Azerbaijani diaspora or Azeri, I guess is what's called diaspora. But it made me connect those two things. Burning Bright is in the chat talking about he posted an article that we should look at here in a minute.
Do it.
That connects Syria with Armenia, but I don't want to derail what you were getting at. But man, here I was thinking that I was going to be branded the anti-Semite of the evening, and then Matt goes off and brings in the Kalergi plan and just takes the title.
I got your back, man. Don't worry. I'll take a bullet for you. Don't worry. I'll totally take a bullet.
The ADL is going to be writing a very sternly worded letter to John over that.
Well, it's crazy, right? Because Kalergi is known for he did so much more than simply the one little Kalergi. I think they like it that we're all like fixating on the one small aspect of his broader agenda, which is the Kalergi plan. But there's so much more. This guy is the father of the European Union and so much more. This guy is the guy who he took control of the Marshall Plan. He took control of the San Francisco conference that crafted the European Union. Like he worked with John Foster Dulles in shaping and organizing where funds were going to go and the rebuilding of Europe. He introduced and crafted Article 52 to 56 of the United Nations Charter that allowed for the creation of regional blocks, which allowed for the legal justification for the creation of the European Union. Because without Article 52, because otherwise the United Nations itself, the charter itself is pretty solid. If you look at the foundation of the charter, as it was drafted, it's based on the immutability of the sovereign nation state. That's non-negotiable. The sovereign nation state always has to be preserved and be the deciding factor in what the United Nations does or doesn't do. It's based upon the idea of legalizing aggressive acts of war from one power to another. It's very unambiguous in a lot of these core principles, and the idea of like pursuing economic cooperation to make lives better for people. All of these things are pretty good, but the thing that made it toxic, after Roosevelt died, 2 weeks later, you have the San Francisco conference, and Kalergi now is dominating it. He's got like an inside seat with Truman. Truman's like meeting with Kalergi. He's bringing in Winston Churchill into the mix, and Kalergi's like laughing because he's now all of a sudden the guy who's allowed to draft things like Article 52 that allows for regional blocks. NATO was created out of the Article 52 as well later on in 1949. All of this stuff. So you got that, right? Now bringing it back up to the present, when I'm looking at Mario Draghi, the former Goldman Sachs eco investment banker who became a leading technocrat, former head of Italy, he's also a follower of the Coudenhove Kalergi operation and works very closely with Carney. He put forth an idea for sort of a defense bank for Europe. That's part of the Rearm Europe idea of creating like a fund of like whatever $250 billion, which can then provide out of budget funds for nations to draw from to build up their military industrial capabilities outside of the budget that they have to balance every cycle or every quarter. I forget when they have to balance their budget. So you got a separate budget now being created to do this, like, preparation for war with Russia thing. Carney's on board with it with his Canadian Defense Bank. Also, you have something very, very bad, I would say, happening, which is 4 separate war games happening on China's perimeter in their backyard, right? So that's going on right now. And people who've seen our shows, they know I've shown these sorts of images a lot. There's currently about like 200,000 US troops that have been stationed across China's backyard. It's grown like it was really begun by Hillary Clinton and Obama back in 2012 when the Asia Pivot was launched, and it's grown like in leaps and bounds since then. And currently this is just some of the military bases encircling China in not just Guam, but 28,000 troops in South Korea, 56,000 troops stationed in Japan. Long-range missiles are set up. THAAD missiles are set up with a deep strike capability into China as well as Russia, if you point it northwards. Philippines also has set up something like another 6 U.S. military bases in the Philippines and has signed on to a deeper military enmeshment. There's a number of others that I'm not even mentioning here. So you got that going on, and now you have war games. And I just noticed, just right now as we're speaking, you've got what do you have here? You got Taiwan. Sorry, no, this is U.S. and allies train forces for the Pacific War in China. That's published July 15th. So that's based on the Talisman Sabre that's happening right now with 35,000 personnel, including the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, Coast Guard, and Space Force, and 18 nations who are all carrying out this historic, there's never in world history been a military exercise this big, premised on the need to go to war with China. That's happening for, I think it's like 12 days or something. Then you have, on top of that, Taiwan is having separately their own largest ever exercise to stop a so-called invasion from China. That's July 17th today, going on right now. This one actually is using U.S. HIMARS launchers in their exercises. There's 22,000 reservists who are deployed in this massive exercise. and they're trying to adopt a lot of the lessons of Ukraine as if that's a role model to follow. It's like people are joking that Taiwan is the Ukraine of the Pacific, and now they're going and saying like they're gonna like follow the Ukrainian model. It's like, what do you say? You're like, you want to have mass suicide? Oh, you're on mute, Gordon.
Oh. We're just gonna rename Taiwan Ukraine.
You know, you might as well, right?
Yeah.
And then we'll rename it a big hole in the ocean, I guess. And you have here also another thing called a third military exercise that's happening also right now is the RE4PAC, U.S. Pacific Air Force, starting July 9th. It's still going on, involving 12,000 personnel, 300 aircraft, 25 locations in the North Mariana Islands. That's going on right now as we speak. This is from July 10th. It announced it. Then you have the Australian War Games in greater detail. Oh yeah, that's the Talisman Saber. And then there's another war game called RIMPAC, which I don't actually have here, but RIMPAC is the fourth military game that's happening. Oh, and by the way, I forgot to mention this, but you know, Taiwan's always like complaining and bellyaching about their personal airspace being invaded by the big bad Chi-Coms. Their airspace is frigging over a big chunk of China mainland territory. So that rectangle there in yellow, that's what Taiwan calls their airspace. So whenever a Chinese plane flies over Chinese land, like mainland, that still sets off red alarms in Taiwan, which has like a ton of Green Berets who have been sent down to train the Taiwanese military to use them as proxies in this, the way we've used Ukrainians. So that's going on, let alone ignoring the fact that Taiwan is legally part of China. It's an autonomous province of China, but even the U.S. State Department acknowledges that there's a one China policy and a one China only, not two Chinas.
The official policy, the official position of the U.S. State Department.
Yeah.
Has always been that Taiwan is part of China. Yeah.
Yeah. It's one China. It's just like an autonomous province. That's all it is. It's like, relax, you know? And oh yeah, here's the other one. France just released a massive report also calling for preparing for a major war in Europe by 2030. What that's going to look like and how you're going to do that when you have a woke idiot population that's degenerated for like 60 straight years. I'm not even too sure, but that's at least part of their design. And the last one here that bothers me is simultaneously while all this is happening, you also have Space Force, which I think has a lot of prospect, a lot of good potential to it. But, you know, while all this is happening, and I've read the speeches of a lot of the leading commanders who are overseeing this training exercise, it's the largest orbital warfare exercise in history. Not that it's a big history. Space Force is still pretty new. But Chance Saltzman, he makes a point very clearly in his rhetoric that he's organizing people to hate China and to prepare that we have to get all these systems of interoperability in place right now to have total dominance over our rival China before China gets us. And the evidence that he gives that China is bad, there's two. One, that they used one of their satellites to pull two of their defunct satellites into a lower orbit to try to like flex their muscles and show us what they can do. I mean, how is that even like a military threat that they just took two of their satellites and moved it into a lower junk orbit? But he's like, because we can't do that, that means that they're flexing their muscles and threatening us. And number two, that China has sent 3 of their boats to encircle, to take a tour around Australia. Not even going into Australian waters, but staying in international waters. But they basically like drove their boats around Australia and went back home. And they're saying like that is a sign of total belligerence that we have to now prepare for war with China. You kidding me?
They're like, buzzing the tower. They're buzzing the tower. I saw this scene in Top Gun. They're buzzing the tower, and the guy in Australia spilled his coffee all over himself, and now we have to have a war with China. Anyway, I do want to share this quick little since you and I were talking about Azerbaijan before the show that Burning Bright put in the chat. This is really interesting. Why Iran fears a Syria-Azerbaijan axis. Syria and Azerbaijan pledged to deepen ties, including a landmark Azerbaijani gas export deal via Turkey. Iranian media warned of a potential redeployment of Syrian fighters into the Caucasus highlighting regional tensions. Reports of Israeli-Syrian contacts in Baku added to Tehran's suspicion of an anti-Iran alignment involving Azerbaijan, Turkey, and Israel. Syrian President Ahmad al-Sharaz's visit to Baku last weekend highlighted a dramatic shift in regional alliances, prompting a mix of concern, suspicion, and strategic recalculation across Iranian media. Let me see. I'm just trying to skim it so we don't have to read the whole thing. But yeah, I mean, it looks like what they're implying is that Syria and Azerbaijan may be forming an alliance against Iran, which again, this kind of like feeds into the idea of using the land bridge, Syria land bridge, to get to Iran. And remember, we talked yesterday about how Azerbaijan was used as the staging ground or the launch point for the drones to attack Tehran.
Yeah.
And as Burning Bright, he said it in the chat. I said it yesterday at the end of the show with Joaquim that Dagestan is right across the border north of Azerbaijan, and Dagestan is where like the Russian special forces are based out of. The Wagner group is from there. Much of the Wagner group is from there. There's a lot of like history with the recent history, the past 20 years, like Putin Russian history with Dagestan and the Russian special forces, and they're right there, like right across the border from Azerbaijan and Armenia. And I just wonder if Dagestan is going to come into the mix here. This is pretty interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely something worth keeping on the radar. It's not something I haven't really looked at. I know Burning Bright has had direct interaction with some pretty interesting Dagestanis. But I think that the concern that there's like this arc of crisis being sparked right now, like there's the Bernard Lewis plan idea, is that we can like create an arc of crisis utilizing the weaponization of radical Islamist movements, especially to disrupt the soft underbelly of Eurasia and destroy any potential emergence of either a Russia, China, Iran alliance, or any type of viable nation state structure, the likes of which we had seen with Gamal Abdel Nasser or Ataturk, or even Saddam Hussein in the 1970s, or the Saudis in 76, 77, you know, when what you'd seen is that everybody who comes to power who wants to get things done, and as far as like meeting the needs of their people, ending hunger, ending war, ending poverty, they realize, oh, I've got a lot of power within this thing called the nation state that I'm all of a sudden operating within, and they start coming to the same conclusion that they can do things to problem solve, to get shit done. Even we saw this with Anwar Sadat, who was not a good guy. This guy was a peon for the Muslim Brotherhood in the 40s and 50s. But then when this guy comes to power after Nasser is out in Egypt, all of a sudden he starts doing some useful things. He's like, yeah, I guess I can actually, you know, build infrastructure projects and like snap my fingers and provide some contracts to help businesses get some opportunities to build stuff and invite in French and German construction companies, you know, and all of a sudden, as soon as they do that, they got to be executed. You know, you got to have a Muslim Brotherhood assassination of a Saudi king or an Egyptian leader or anybody, because they don't want the nation state to be used. They want world government. They want these Pan Europa fascist sort of massive regions to control with like a caliph or a Holy Roman Emperor type, you know, whether a King Charles or whether some other variation. Easy to manage, some hereditary psych job that then will be much more easy to get, you know, like command and control over an entirely complex system. They really like that idea of that type of hereditary monarchy type of idea, just because you can have an oligarchy and its nasty inner control mechanisms of its shadow government exert its full influence in a very efficient way onto a whole ton of people that would otherwise be very difficult to manage if you had to like deal with each person's like national jurisdiction, and you know, all that's way too many barriers, you know, between the individual will of the master and the slaves that they want to control. So I'm just saying that because, yeah, like that arc of crisis idea of setting fire to Azerbaijan, connecting that to the Middle East, to Syria, and onward into Ukraine, that cuts deep. It's a bad cut, and especially it makes Iran quite vulnerable, especially if there's fifth columnists, which is my fear inside of Iran. That's my big concern right now, is that there's like sleeper cells and high-level fifth columnists deeply embedded in Iran. As we saw in 1979, you know, we had that show with Cynthia, and she went through pretty well how that Iranian revolution, there's 350,000 soldiers in the Iranian military under the Shah, and the Shah had tons of problems and corruption and stupidity and all this stuff, but he wanted development, and he was working with Iraq, and he was working with Saudi Arabia, and he was trying to work with, you know, Italian and German construction companies to build nuclear power and all of these things. So he had to be ousted, and they did it so quickly. It was like so efficient by just getting some high-level traders to be positioned into high-level positions within the military and within the civil service. Bam, the whole thing like went off with a hitch, overseen by a little bit of Israeli and a little bit of U.S. intelligence. But the thing was like a bloodbath, but it was an efficient revolution. And my fear is that they're going to do it again. And I hope I'm wrong. And I hope Russia and China have like helped the Iranians clear house and keep control. If I'm wrong, it'll suck. We'll see what happens, but definitely it's very, very fragile.